It's not just sport nutrition that's important. After you're done being an athlete, after you hang up your suit, maybe you're going to be doing some other form of activity to be active outside, or maybe you've decided that you trained a lot throughout the first quarter of your life, third of your life, and now you want to switch over to a different level of activity. Regardless, nutrition impacts not only how you're fueling, but it impacts your health and your wellness. So I like to look at it as a learning curve. And in the ideal world, from the time that you're born to maybe around 10, ignorance is bliss, and maybe you don't even really think about nutrition. But in the green line, if you educate yourself and we're proactive about what we're learning and how you can apply it to what you're doing in the pool, out of the pool, to recover, everything that goes into nutrition, if you really focus on it and make it an effort, you can really build on that nutrition, and your percent of knowledge is learned before you even reach the age of 30 or 40. You learn so much early on. But let's look at the other side of it. Maybe you're someone that says, oh, nutrition's not important, or I get away doing things without even really thinking about it. And maybe I have the perspective or the opinion that nutrition really doesn't affect how I feel. Then you might follow more of that ignorance is bliss line, that orange or yellow line, where you can see the learning curve just isn't as steep. And then maybe you get to the age of 50 or 60, and I know it's my opinion, but it's also, I think we have a lot of information to show it, that a lot of times people are forced to learning their nutrition concepts later. It's because maybe there's something that happened with their health. Maybe there was a chronic disease that popped up by the age of 50 or 60 or 70, where they have to learn some of the core concepts of nutrition that if you were proactive about it before, your quality of life is better. And obviously we don't run into some of the issues down the road, like I said, with chronic disease and some of the other issues that we hear about. Okay, so our job today is to educate ourselves, acknowledge that nutrition affects some of the parts of not only our training, but overall health and wellness. And let's get jump started on what this nutrition knowledge can really do for you. Okay, so next thing we're going to talk about is some of these core nutrition concepts. And in the ideal world, and maybe some of you guys have participated this in the past, when we're at the training center, we have this beautiful teaching kitchen at our facility, and I can get all of you guys into the kitchen, and we're not just talking about food, we're actually getting our hands dirty, and we're actually making some delicious things. But this year, we're going to do things a little bit differently. Okay, we're going to talk about all the details first. So Nutrition 101. There are specific needs that every individual has. They're a little bit different based on how quickly someone's growing, the age they are, their size of their body, some of their genetics, but the core concepts are really the same. Okay, and that's what I'm going to kind of run through very quickly, just again to make sure that we all are on the same page. There are many things to consider in terms of what are your needs. What do you need to eat? Why do you need to eat those? And that's really based on how you're training, what the rest of your day looks like outside of training. When should you be eating those things? And then the question I get all the time is, how much should I be eating? So those are all things that you need to consider. Also looking on the types of foods that you can be eating, or you should be eating on a daily basis. You should all be familiar with carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. Those are what we call macronutrients. And in my world, when someone says macronutrients, that means that those foods or those nutrients are providing calories or energy. So carbohydrates, proteins, and fats all provide calories in addition to the other things that make them up. So for carbohydrates, you're familiar, fruits and grains are mostly carbohydrates. Vegetables are also carbohydrates to an extent. There are ones that are more starchy, like sweet potatoes or corn, that give you a little bit more calories per serving. Or on the other end of the spectrum, let's just say leafy greens. Those have some carbohydrates in them, but they're not as condensed form of carbohydrates or calories. Moving on to proteins. The purpose of a protein is to repair muscle, build muscle, and maintain muscle. Okay, so when you're eating proteins, that's why you're eating them. You're eating them to maintain muscle and build muscle. Going back to carbohydrates really fast. When you're eating carbohydrates, those are for energy. Okay, and a lot of people kind of, I don't know, people like to hate on carbohydrates. They say, oh, well, they're bad for you. It's what causes people to gain weight. For an athlete, that is your fuel. Okay, and it's important to remember that, because when you hear some of these fad diets and some of these things that are flying around in terms of people saying, oh, this is how you lose weight and this is how you cut down on calories, a lot of times people like to hate on carbohydrates. If you're a high performing athlete, you need some. Okay, and depending on how you're training, you might need more, you might need a lot. So we'll talk about that in a second. The last macronutrient, very briefly, is a dietary fat, and dietary fats can be used for energy. If you were someone that was sitting at a desk all day, dietary fats might be a good energy source for you because they can be packed with a lot of anti-inflammatory, antioxidant type of essential fatty acids. If you're a high performing athlete that's trying to sprint and do high intensity workouts and do doubles, that kind of thing, you don't really want to choose dietary fats as your main fuel source. Okay, so kind of keep that in mind. Yes, dietary fats can be used for energy, but they really should be used for those antioxidants, those essential fatty acids. And I have that drop of oil there as an explanation of what dietary fat should be used for. That drop of oil is an indication that it helps keep your joints healthy. Kind of keeps, like if you have achy shoulders, achy knees, anything like that, those dietary fats kind of help keep everything lubricated and happy. Okay, so if you're talking about, all right, well, I just need carbohydrates, can I get them from anywhere? I have athletes that think, oh, well, candy is full of sugar and sugar is carbohydrates, so I can just eat a bunch of candy to get my carbohydrates. I like to look at, or I like to provide an answer in the form of thinking about your food choices as nutrient dense foods. Your goal, and when someone says, oh, is this healthy or is this healthy, which is better than the other one? I like to say you should reflect on how nutrient dense is the food choice that you're choosing. Okay, and so if you look at some of the most least dense or nutrient dense foods, that would be your junk food that has a lot of calories to it. Could be the candies that if you eat a lot of them can have a lot of calories to it. But in terms of nutrient density, there's hardly any vitamins or minerals in there. There's hardly any fiber. All the things that we've learned that are so good for our bodies, there's hardly any of those things in there. It's just calories, so they're empty calories. The middle or the moderate nutrient dense foods, if you're looking at, again, how many calories are in a serving of those foods, some of the higher fat foods would be a moderately nutrient dense food option. Now, it's not to say that they're good or they're bad. It's just making a point of saying that it's important to consider how much nutrition is packed into the serving of calories. So for me, when I'm talking to an athlete about the moderate nutrient dense foods, I say these are good for you. They can be good for you, like an avocado. But if you have a huge bowl of guacamole sitting in front of you, you have to be mindful of how much of that guacamole you're eating and how much do you actually need. Okay, so you just have to be careful in terms of the quantity that you're eating. And then the last spectrum in terms of nutrient density is the most nutrient dense items. And the gold standard there is vegetables because of the amount of nutrition that's packed into a serving of a certain type of vegetable. An example of this, or an applied example, would be if you chose to eat a huge salad, like the size of a plate like this big. There's so much nutritional value packed into that particular meal or that serving of calories that it's the most nutrient dense option you can buy or you can consume. Okay, so that's just, again, reflecting on, okay, if I just need carbs, proteins, and fats, and I need energy, how do I choose my food sources? That's how you choose. You talk about, or you try to think through which is the most nutrient dense option. Another way to look at that nutrient density is just saying all the micronutrients that are in foods. When I'm choosing various foods, I should choose the ones that are packed full of all these micronutrients. So this is just an example of when you hear, oh, you should eat your greens, or make sure that you get fruits and vegetables from all different colors, or making your plate as colorful as possible. You're doing that because of all these different micronutrients that packed into each one of these different types of nutrient dense foods. Okay, so I usually tell athletes, just try to have as much color as possible, and you're eating those because of all the different micronutrients that are present in those foods. You know, a very timely example of trying to, you know, use some of these foods to our advantage, when COVID started becoming this big thing that everybody's talking about, oh, you know, how do we prevent the severity, or how do we prevent ourselves from actually catching COVID-19? Everybody was looking to, well, what foods or nutrients are going to prevent me from getting it? And you know, I guess good or bad, there's no food that's going to prevent it, but all of these micronutrients will keep your immune system strong and functioning as best as it can, so that if you get an illness like that, and I mean, it could be a cold, a flu, anything that's introduced to your body, you want your immune system to be as strong as possible to fight it off. And that's why you eat these micronutrients. So this slide is meant to be overwhelming. It's meant to have so many words on it. The only reason I put it up here is to say all the different colors of the fruits and vegetables that you eat, the reds, the oranges, the yellows, the greens, the blues, the purples, and the whites, they all have reasons to eat them. I went through and I bolded and italicized the ones that are directly related to sport performance. And you can see there's a bunch of reasons why you should be eating all these different things on a daily basis. And athletes will come to me and they'll say, well, can I just eat them all in one sitting? Can I just eat one salad a day and call it good? And the answer is, sadly, no, for those people that don't really like vegetables. And it's because these nutrients are what we call, they're water soluble, or that they're not very stable. Meaning that if your body needs those, let's just say body needs vitamin C, if you eat something that has a lot of vitamin C in it, it'll use what it needs, but then it'll get rid of everything else. So every time you eat, let's just say you have a huge bowl of oranges, your body's going to use the vitamin C in the moment that it needs, but then it's going to get rid of everything else. So the next time later in the day that you need vitamin C, you need to reintroduce it. So getting as many fruits and vegetables throughout the day as you can is the best bet. Then the question is, when should I be eating all of these things? Okay, and the answer is, for an active individual, 5 to 6 meals and snacks a day. Ideally, you eat those every 2 to 3 hours. So kind of think through your typical day. Are you eating every 2 to 3 hours? And if the answer is no, you should look at, well, can I be eating smaller meals so that I'm a little bit more hungry for a snack 2 or 3 hours after I ate lunch or dinner or breakfast? And you can then ask the question, well, why? Why would I do that? And for an athlete, there are a couple of reasons. One, it helps you to recover from training. If you do numerous meals a day, getting doses of protein numerous times a day helps to rebuild muscle better than just eating 3 meals a day. The other reason would be to give you energy for some of the training that you're doing. So especially if you're doing doubles and then you add in a strength and conditioning session, you need to fuel for each one of those sessions and you need to recover from each one of those sessions. The last part about this, which I think a lot of times we forget, is that there's a mindfulness or a psychology to eating, that if you're eating huge portions when you sit down for a meal, smaller snacks where you're proactively putting some thought into the types of foods that you're eating will help you be more mindful and make better food choices. Okay, so think about when you're, extremely hungry and you're starving and you finally open up the fridge when you get home. A lot of times you'll go to town on anything that you see first. And if you're not as hungry, you've maybe had a recovery snack after practice, you can be more mindful and make better decisions when it is time to finally eat a meal or sit down and have either a meal or a snack. Okay, so this is just an example of a typical day for a swimmer. Maybe you have morning workouts, so you need to eat a snack beforehand. If home is not too far from the pool, you can go straight home and you can have a big breakfast to recover from that morning workout. You can then have lunch after you take your nap in the morning. You want to have a small snack before you go to practice at 3 o'clock. You want to make sure you get a recovery snack in immediately after practice, and then you have dinner. So you can see how quickly that can add up to 6 times a day that you're eating something. How much people eat or how many calories they need is truly individual. Like I said, a bunch of different factors. Mostly it's body size and age. But in general, people want to know, well, how many calories do I need? And the answer truly is you need to consume as many calories as you're burning. Okay. And in the ideal world, or when you're maintaining your body weight, the calories that you're consuming, they add up to the amount of calories that you're burning. Okay. And the athletes that I work with, and I've worked with for a while, this is kind of, I see it's a maturity or the nutrition knowledge that they build. They kind of know, or they start to really kind of understand how to adjust their calorie intake depending on their calorie expenditure. And that is something that it is something that you have to start kind of noticing. Paying attention to your hunger, paying attention to how your body feels in terms of how worn down you are or how tired you are. Like I said, in the ideal world, everything is balanced. So the calories that you're consuming, your meals, your snacks, the beverages that you drink, if you're sitting there drinking a huge thing of Gatorade, the calories in that do count towards the calories that you consume on a daily basis. And then let's say the nutrition products that you consume. So maybe you have a Cliff Bar before practice, or maybe you have a recovery bar afterwards. All those calories do add into how many calories you consume, and they should off balance the training calories that you're burning, maybe the strength conditioning that you're doing. And then especially during the summer, if you're out running around, I don't know, maybe you go to the pool on an off day and you're not just laying around. That extra calorie expenditure should be factored into that overall calorie balance. If an athlete says, well, oh my gosh, I was shut in during this COVID-19 for 4 weeks and I didn't have a pool to train in, and I gained 10 pounds, I don't know how it happened. A very simple explanation would be you probably consumed more calories than you burned. And that was something that, yes, it was a really hard transition. All of a sudden, not being able to train the way that you had been training 5, 6 days a week for years, it was really hard for people to adjust. And, you know, some athletes were noticing that maybe that weight gain was in the form of muscle. They all of a sudden were putting muscle on, and it was because they weren't burning as many calories. Some of the athletes also realized that they weren't exercising as much and they were sitting around, and they didn't have the luxury of having it be muscle, but maybe they realized that, hey, you know what, I put on some weight and it was not in the form of muscle. So it's something to be aware of, that if you're not burning as many calories, you need to adjust how many calories you're consuming. Okay, so this is an imbalance example that would lead to weight gain. Your meals, your snacks, and your beverages can add up to more than what you're burning. And I a lot of times will see this. People will consume, I don't know, it could be in the form of milk. Milk does have calories, or it could be in the form of Gatorade. People are just drinking Gatorade because it has taste to it, or smoothies. I mean, smoothies are yummy and they have a lot of good nutrition in them, but they can add up to 400, 500 calories that you gulp down really quickly, and it doesn't really fill you up as much. So all of those things can add into consuming more than what you're burning. The opposite example would be that the calories that you're consuming are not as many as the calories that you're burning. And this is something that I'm informing and educating a lot of our national team athletes on, in terms of, hey, as you get back into the pool, maybe you have a 50-meter pool that all of a sudden you have access to, and you're training the way that you normally would train this time of the year, and you're not adjusting your calorie intake. What can happen is you're burning a lot of energy and you're not consuming enough. And what tends to happen here is that's when you're under recovering. So let's just say the afternoon workout that you're showing up to, you're still exhausted from the first workout, or you have I don't know, you're kind of exhausted from training and you're just too tired to eat. That happens a lot with our national team athletes, but it's something to be aware of, and it can be a cause for concern if that energy deficit is too much. Over the long term, over the course of a week, a couple of weeks, under consuming calories can really impact not only how you feel in terms of energy wise, but it can also affect your health. And that's usually when people get sick, they get run down. And then a lot of times, you know, they're having to go to the doctor because they just don't know what's going on. So we're trying to prevent that. So in order to prevent that, I think that there are 5 things that everyone, hopefully, during this webinar or during this talk, can either reflect on and consider, or maybe you're checking off all the boxes and saying, yes, I understand and I agree with all of these statements. So the first one, and hopefully that we're all on this page, but we're all acknowledging that food affects how we feel and how we perform on any given day. Okay, and it might be the food that you eat makes you feel like you have enough energy to complete your workout. Maybe it's the food that you consume for recovery helps you feel better for the next workout. Maybe it's, you know what, when I go and I get a huge hamburger from whatever restaurant's your favorite, and it has the bacon, the cheese, and everything on it, I acknowledge that it affects how I feel afterwards. Okay, so hopefully we're all in agreement on that number 1. Number 2, good nutrition requires that you're purposeful, and it requires planning. And I see this as one of the biggest roadblocks or barriers for a lot of athletes is they want stuff that's convenient, or they get really busy and they don't think ahead, and then they show up to practice and they haven't eaten since lunch and it's 3 or 4 hours later, and they're not prepared for that afternoon workout. Okay, so good nutrition requires that you're mindful and you think ahead and you're proactive. Number three is that if you can have mindful eating behaviors and you can think through what are the foods that I need, how hungry am I, and then when I actually sit down to a meal, I'm making good food choices and I'm reflecting on, okay, I could stop before feeling stuffed or feeling like I overate. That's mindfulness when you're eating. But being mindful can help you with your food choices and your portion sizes. It's interesting. I travel with one of our sports psychologists a lot, and he at one point he said to me, he's like, "How do you like control how much chocolate you eat?" And I was like, "Wow, I mean, I do remember eating a lot of chocolate and remembering how I feel after eating a lot of chocolate, and it's just something that I reflect on before I eat it. Is I remember what it was like when I ate too much of this and how I felt. So I'm going to kind of control the portion sizes so that I don't have that, I guess, the guilt or the realization that I overdid it. So it's being mindful. And a lot of times that means slowing down. Okay. A lot of times you're so hungry that you're eating as fast as you can, and it requires that you slow down. And that's kind of when you hear some of the recommendations of turn the TV off, try to have like a quiet, calm environment while you're eating so that you can be more mindful. Number four is nutrition habits are longer lasting than diets and meal plans. So often, especially in our society, people are saying, well, I'm going to follow this diet that's going to help me get my nutrition back on track. And really, it's the long-term nutrition habits that have the most impact. And the last thing that I think we all need to embrace before we move any further is that only you can be accountable and only you are responsible for the foods that you eat. Okay. And, it's kind of a hard time right now when you're still relying on your parents to go do the grocery shopping and maybe your mom or your dad's making the meals that you eat after practice. There's only a certain amount of preparation that you're doing yourself. But as long as you continue to communicate to your parents how you feel, maybe some of the information that you're learning in this talk, maybe there's something that you can pull from this the 40 minutes that we're talking about nutrition that you can say, hey, can we incorporate more of this? Or can you pick up these kinds of snacks for me? Because at the end of the day, only you can be responsible for the foods that you're consuming and how well you're prepared and fueled for the training that you're doing. Okay, so after we've embraced those 5 things, these are some of the things that I think you can really kind of look at and say, am I already doing those things? And if I'm not, can I do them a little bit better? So the first one is how you're building your plate. You need to crush this every time you sit down and you eat a meal or a snack. So very quickly, how do you figure out how to build an athlete plate? In my world as a dietitian, I look at how big is an athlete, what's their body weight. In my world, I know that there's a certain gram per kilo recommendation for carbohydrates. So I'll calculate out, and I'll get my calculator out, and I'll calculate how many grams of carbs they need, how many grams of protein they need. And then I will look at all the different servings of carbohydrates and proteins out there that will meet or add up to some of those recommendations. And that's a whole bunch of numbers. And you're probably really bored with that. And I get bored with it. But I always say that working with a dietitian is the luxury of we figure out all those numbers and we do the calculation and then we hand the information back to the athlete so that they then can say, all I need to do is build my plate to look like this moderate plate. It might take the form of a different plate, which I'll talk about in the next slide. But if I'm looking at all of these numbers that come out of some of the calculations that I know will address your energy needs, and really these numbers that I'm figuring out are making sure you have enough energy in the form of carbohydrate, you have enough protein to rebuild your muscles, to build the muscle if you're trying to get stronger. I make sure all the nutrients are there in terms of the recommendations, but then I'm giving you the info that's important in terms of the athlete plate. Okay, and so I think that if you haven't really considered, or you're not really thinking through how you're dishing out your plate at any particular meal that you're sitting down to eat, that's the first step. So let's just say right now you have one pool session, it's about 2 hours long, and then maybe you have a lifting session too. By the time you get to dinner, you should be, let's just say your mom's made, I don't know, maybe she's made spaghetti. Okay, so You sit down, the first thing you should do is maybe make a side of salad. Most of your plate should be from fruits and vegetables still if you're moderately training. Okay, so you build your salad, you have that on the side, and then you're looking at, well, how much protein do I need? A lot of times athletes will say, oh, well, I need to eat 2 chicken breasts because I want to build muscle. Truth is, based on your body size, you only need a certain amount of protein in each meal. So a quarter of your plate, and this applies to most people, a quarter of your plate should be from protein. And just as an example, a deck of cards are the size of my palm, so not my fingers included, so about the size of my fist. This size is about 20 to 30 grams of protein. Okay, that's about as much as most people need in one meal. So that's about the size of a quarter of a plate. So quarter of your plate is from protein. A third of your plate is from grains if you have about 2 hours of pool training, right? So if you're building your plate for an athlete, it should look like a moderate training plate. If you're someone that's training, let's just say you're a miler, or your club team does, 2 hours or 2 times a day, so you're training 4 hours a day, maybe you're going to get back into that routine, then your plate might shift and it's going to look more like this athlete or hard training, distance training athlete's plate. The big difference here is that you'll see that most of the plate is now from grains, and it's not that you're consuming less vegetables. What you'll notice is that most of those vegetables are in the cooked form now. Okay, and that's for a reason. When you cook vegetables, anybody who's cooked like a huge bag of spinach, for example, if you heat it, it then becomes about this size. It's like a small, tiny little serving size. As soon as you cook vegetables, the amount of volume it takes in your stomach shrinks down so you can eat more of them, but they take up less room in your stomach. That's kind of a way to get your nutrients in, get as much vegetables as you need in, but then it makes room for getting enough grains or some of the carbohydrates that you need to fuel your activity. The last thing that you'll notice is that the protein still takes up a quarter of the plate. Okay, and that's because your protein needs really don't change that much depending on how much aerobic activity you're doing. Your protein needs are really based on how big is your body size and how much muscle mass do you have. So regardless of how your training changes throughout the day, your protein needs really don't change that much. All right, and then the last plate that you'll see, and this might have been a plate that you had to kind of model or kind of follow in the off season, or maybe when you were stuck at home a little bit more, is that you had to kind of fill your plate with something that maybe didn't have as many calories, and that was in the form of the fruits and vegetables. So when you're training easier, or you maybe have some time off, you need to kind of focus on getting more vegetables on your plate. Again, proteins are taking up the same portion size, and then whole grains are taking up less room on your plate because you just don't need as much energy to fuel your training. All right, moving on to the next slide. The next thing you need to crush is crushing your hydration. And this is something that a lot of times athletes aren't really reflecting on why they need to hydrate. And it's just kind of an annoying thing that coaches say. But just in general, your urine should be clear and it should have little color to it as often or as many times throughout the day as possible. And that's just something to kind of keep in mind and just do it. And if you if you're the only one in the stall, you're the only one looking at it, but if you can see that there's certain times of the day where your urine is a really dark color, you need to do better. You need to proactively have a water bottle with you. There's some proactive guidelines that I give to athletes. I say, always have a water bottle with you. Never take a full water bottle away from the pool deck after practice. You should be consuming it during practice. Some of the water bottles that have the twist on cap are, I don't know, it's too hard to open them up in between sets. If you have one that's more of a squeeze top or one that you can easily just tip in and it's already open, that's going to be better, and it's going to encourage you to drink more throughout practice so that you're not leaving the pool deck with too much water. You need to consume it during. And then, like I said, what you can have control over and what you're the one that can see this is what your urine color looks like. Okay, and this is just an example. This picture in the bottom left is an example of urine testing that we did at an open water camp. And that middle urine sample was from an athlete that, I'd hate to be doomsday about it, but he pulled out of the 10K early. He did not finish the 10K. It was down in Fort Lauderdale, so it was pretty hot, but he started the day and he started his race really dehydrated. So your goal is to have it look more like 1 or 2 and less like 5 or 6. So just kind of look at that and reflect on that on a daily basis. The next thing is recovery nutrition. And Kelsey, I'll make sure that everybody gets a copy of these slides. This particular slide is one that I think you should print it out. You should have it in your locker, or maybe you have it on your refrigerator. But all of this information it's really, really important for swimmers because of the amount of training you do every day. Recovery in the form of recovery nutrition will help you recover faster. And I say it's so important for swimmers because there are other athletes that the way they train, maybe they only have 1 training session a day. And it's not crucial that they recover fast. Their bodies will eventually recover if they're given 24 hours to do so. But for swimmers, how can we speeden up the process and have your body feel ready and prepared for the next training session? So really all you need to focus on with recovery nutrition, there are 4 things. You need to focus on rehydration. Okay, you need to focus on replenishing energy stores, which is from carbohydrates. You need to focus on rebuilding muscle, and that's going to be with protein intake, and then reinforcing the immune system. Okay, so if you're looking at those 4 things, you're looking at rehydration, carbohydrates, proteins, and then some of those micronutrients we talked about in the beginning. A smoothie is a magical recovery drink. It has all of those things. It has carbohydrates from the fruit. It has protein from the milk that you're using. Maybe it's soy milk. Maybe it's almond milk. Actually has no protein in it. It has 1 gram. Okay, so it's not a great base for a recovery smoothie. Regular milk has 8 grams to it per serving. But then if you're adding fruit or vegetables into that smoothie, then you're getting some of the micronutrients going to help reinforce your immune system. Okay, so like I said, you'll have this talk has examples in there of what to add into your recovery snack, but you should have carbs, you should have protein, ideally in the form of a liquid. And that's another reason why chocolate milk is such a great recovery drink. It has all of those things. And then have that with a banana, then you're having some of the micronutrients that can help with your immune system. The additional thing to crush is your performance-based snack. So being prepared with a smoothie or a combination of some of these example snacks. This table here gives you some high protein suggestions that you could choose. And then the right 2 columns, carbohydrates, both of those are carbohydrates, so just serving size differences. If you choose 1 protein option and 1 carbohydrate option and pair those together, that's going to be a great recovery snack for you to have in your bag. Okay. Smoothies, again, if you put them in like a Yeti thermos or a Hydro Flask, the smoothie will stay really cold and it'll stay really good for, throughout practice. The other thing you can do is bring a little lunch bag that's insulated so that whatever cold thing that you have stays cold. But again, it takes planning and it takes preparation. Okay, so this is something, if you're doing nothing right now, grabbing a Cliff Bar so that you have something. But in the ideal world, you're starting to focus on getting a little bit of carbohydrate and then you're getting a little bit of protein as well. Those are the 2 things you need to consider when you're choosing snack items. A lot of times I'll see athletes will grab, I don't know, like a bag of pretzels, or they have a piece of fruit. A lot of times we really get the carbs in these snacks, but it's making sure you get protein as well. Okay, this is another example of how to apply all this information into a what should I eat before training, what should I eat during, and what should I eat after. So on the left side, those 2 columns are what you should be eating before. The nutrition guidelines of what you should be considering are included there, but then the most important, or the takeaway thing from this chart, is the examples. The examples are snacks that you can have before practice to give you energy, but they're going to help you have the energy that's going to last with you for a 2-hour practice. If you have workouts that are longer than 90 minutes, so they're 90 to 2 hours, 90 minutes to 2 hours, you might need to have something to consume while you're training. The examples of that could be a sports drink, it could be gels, chews, bars, honestly just a banana if you have the opportunity to eat that. But then afterwards, again, they're the reasons or all the things you need to consider when you're choosing recovery snack options. But then the examples are the takeaway. Okay, it could be peanut butter and jelly, it could be a smoothie, it could be hard-boiled eggs and a piece of fruit. Whatever it is that you're going to eat afterwards and you can have with you, you need to think through how can you make that happen. If you're looking towards competition day, again, planning and preparation and trialing things out, not at the peak meet of the season, trialing them maybe in, you know, a multi-day meet that's halfway through the season. That's what you need to kind of work through and use your trial and error to figure out what's going to sit with you the best. So again, this is kind of more of a slide to print out and just kind of have as a worksheet to help think through how you're going to apply some of this information. But you know, this particular chart helps you think through, if I need to eat a performance-based meal the night before a meet, it should have these things. There's an example column there of different meals that would be good choices for trying to figure out what might sit well with you. So a pasta meal, a rice bowl from Chipotle or any Mexican type restaurant, a large salad that has meat, but then also beans and maybe some grains in it. Those are all examples of what you could have the night before. Also thinking through what type of breakfast you should have. This worksheet will kind of guide you through helping make all of those decisions so that you can have the foods ready. Especially if it's a meet that you're away from home, maybe you're staying in a hotel and you have to really put some thought into how you're going to get these foods in. And then how do we apply all this? How does it all come together? And I think that's one of the biggest things you guys can be working on now, especially while you're home and you have the teachers with you. Your parents can teach you how to do these things and help lead you through these things. But first, you need to develop a plan. You need to think about what you need. Going with your parents to the grocery store so you can kind of see how they're reasoning through making various choices. You know, I really thank my mom for being very conscious of what's on sale. What are some of the fruits and vegetables that are in season so that they taste better? But going to the grocery store, you can learn so much from someone who's been doing it for so long, especially compared to just going off on your own to college without having any idea what you're doing. Put some time into the preparation of the food that you're consuming. This can be something that it can be enjoyable. I compare it to scrapbooking. Some people love scrapbooking. Some people don't want anything to do with scrapbooking. It really can be fun, but a lot of times it's making the time for it. And then making the time to sit down and have your meals. I know we're all busy and we're all rushing around, but as much time as you can really devote to having a stress-free environment while you eat can really go a long way. So again, I want to encourage you to take advantage of this time where you have teachers living with you. How can you learn more? How can you get involved? I really encourage you to learn some of the basic cooking skills. If you don't know how to make pasta, you ask your mom, how do I make this pasta? I know it seems so simple, but I still have some swimmers that really have no idea how to do food preparation. They also don't know how to use a knife. A sharp knife is less dangerous than a dull knife. So having some good utensils and good tools that you feel comfortable with can really go a long way. Like I said, going to the grocery store, learning as much as you can in advance. Provide options and ideas for dinner. If you say, oh, well, I don't like the meals that are prepared, have some ideas. Say, hey, can we try fish tacos tonight? Can we try pasta with pesto instead of tomato sauce? Just kind of provide feedback and suggestions, but then here's the other thing, be willing to help. Don't just, you know, make the requests and then not be willing to kind of to show up and put some effort into helping make the meals as well. And I think it's great if you could make one meal a week. And have your creation served to your family so you can get the feedback of, wow, you did a really good job there, or hey, here's an idea that you can maybe prepare that a little bit better. Okay, so again, all these specifics and these details will mean nothing unless you embrace the 5 things that I talked about in the middle of this presentation. You need to acknowledge that food affects how you feel. You need to be mindful. You need to embrace some of these things as long-term habits, not diets, and then be accountable and responsible for fueling yourself. Okay, so that's all that I had today. Hopefully we have time for questions. I don't know if we do or not. I just wanted to share this awesome picture. I went grocery shopping in Tokyo with John Urbanchek, and it was obviously one of my favorite grocery store trips of my entire life. We had so much fun. But again, take the opportunity in the summer, you have more time on your hands, to dive into some of this nutrition, spend quality time with your parents and family, learn some of those family recipes, get outside and grow a garden. It could start as just a tomato plant that you have on your back deck, but that helps improve mindfulness of the foods that you're eating. And then if you're interested in more nutrition information, I'm sure any of you that are zoomed in today, if you had questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them. But if you also just kind of want to research on your own, teamusa.org/nutrition has so many fact sheets and so much information and recipes for you to do research on your own. Thank you so much for your time today, and hopefully you can take some of this and apply it. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Do you guys have any questions for Lish?
Oh, I got a question of, are you supposed to carb up the night before a big meet? And